Hi everyone, welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's stories. Story 1. This is the story of a young girl named Amber Hagerman, whose tragic fate in 1996 would eventually lead to the creation of a nationwide emergency response system that has since helped save hundreds of young lives. Arlington, Texas, January 1996. The winter air carried a particular crispness that month. The holiday decorations had been packed away, and families had settled back into their regular routines after the festive season. Arlington, nestled between Dallas and Fort Worth, embodied the essence of suburban American life: tree-lined streets, community parks, and neighborhoods where children rode bicycles along sidewalks until dinner time. In those days, Arlington was home to about 300,000 people, large enough to offer amenities like the newly constructed ballpark where the Texas Rangers played, yet small enough that communities maintained their close-knit character. It was a place where neighbors still knew each other's names, where everyday life unfolded with a comfortable familiarity. The Hagerman family was part of this community fabric. Donna Whitson and Richard Hagerman, though separated, were devoted to their two children, 9-year-old Amber and 5-year-old Ricky. Amber, a fourth grader with bright eyes and an infectious smile, was known for her spirited nature and kind heart. She attended elementary school nearby, enjoyed riding her bicycle, and looked after her younger brother with natural protective instincts that seemed beyond her years. The winter days were short, with darkness falling by early evening, but the afternoon still provided enough daylight for children to play outdoors after school. Like many neighborhoods across America, certain locations became unofficial gathering spots for local children. In this particular corner of Arlington, one such place was an abandoned Winn-Dixie grocery store parking lot on East Abrams Street. The empty lot had become something of an attraction for neighborhood children, particularly because of a makeshift bike ramp that had been constructed there. On weekends, the sound of bicycle wheels hitting the pavement and children's laughter often filled the air as they practiced jumps and tricks. Parents generally considered it safe. The lot was visible from several nearby homes, and in this community, watching out for each other's children was an unspoken agreement among neighbors. The grocery store itself had been vacant for some time, its windows covered, parking spaces empty except for the occasional visitor. The building stood as a silent observer to the children who played in its shadow, its empty interior contrasting with the vibrant life that briefly animated its exterior when young cyclists gathered there. The date was January 13, 1996. For most residents of Arlington, it began as an unremarkable winter Saturday. Families ran errands, attended children's sports activities, or simply enjoyed the weekend leisure time. The Hagerman family's day had begun normally as well. Donna had plans for the day, and Amber and Ricky were spending time with their maternal grandfather, Jimmy Whitson. The temperature had climbed to a mild 65 degrees by midday, unseasonably warm for January in Texas, making it a perfect afternoon for children to play outside. Around 3 p.m., Amber asked her grandfather if she and Ricky could ride their bicycles to the familiar abandoned grocery store lot just a few blocks away. With initial hesitation but ultimate consent, he agreed, but with clear instructions: they needed to stay together, and they couldn't be gone long. The children pedaled away down the street, Amber on her pink and white bicycle, a Christmas gift she'd received just weeks earlier, with 5-year-old Ricky following behind on his smaller bike. Their grandfather decided to check on them shortly after they left, walking the short distance to the lot where he could watch them play from a distance, a precaution that seemed unnecessary but felt right to him. For a little while, everything was normal. The children rode around the parking lot, taking turns on the small ramp, their laughter carrying in the winter air. But what no one could have known was that these ordinary moments at a neighborhood play spot were about to become the prelude to a mystery that remains unsolved to this day, and a tragedy that would eventually save countless other children. The abandoned grocery store parking lot, with its cracked asphalt and fading painted lines, would soon become the focus of police investigations, media attention, and eventually, national policy discussions. But in those final moments of normalcy, it was just another place where children played on a Saturday afternoon in suburban America. After about 15 minutes at the lot, young Ricky decided he'd had enough and wanted to return home. His grandfather watched as the boy turned his bicycle around and began pedaling back toward their house. Amber, however, wanted to continue riding. She waved to her brother and stayed behind, taking another lap around the parking lot, enjoying the unseasonable warmth of the winter day. It was the last time her family would see her alive. Just across the street from the abandoned grocery store lived Jimmy Kevill, a 78-year-old retiree who often sat by his window, observing the neighborhood activities with the careful attention of someone who had lived long enough to value the simple rhythms of community life. On this particular Saturday, his routine observation of the street would become a crucial witness account. From his window, Kevill noticed a black pickup truck pull into the parking lot where Amber was riding alone. He watched as a man quickly exited the vehicle, approached the girl, and forced her into the truck as she screamed and struggled. It happened with such startling speed that by the time the significance of what he was witnessing registered, the truck was already pulling away, heading northeast on East Abram Street. Kevill immediately called the police. His description was clear: a black or dark blue pickup truck, possibly a Ford F-150. The driver was a white or Hispanic male, approximately 25 to 40 years old, of medium build. The time was approximately 3:30 p.m. The response was swift. Within minutes, patrol cars began arriving at the scene. Amber's bicycle lay on its side near the bike ramp, the front wheel still spinning slowly when the first officers arrived, a haunting image of interrupted childhood. As police secured the area, Amber's grandfather, having lost sight of her during the brief period he was watching Ricky head home, returned to the lot looking for his granddaughter. Instead, he found police officers and the beginning of what would become one of the most extensive searches in the region's history. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Donna Whitson rushed to the scene when she received the devastating call that her daughter had been taken. Richard Hagerman was notified immediately as well. Within hours, family members, neighbors, and soon complete strangers were organizing search parties, printing flyers, and combing through nearby areas calling Amber's name. By nightfall, Amber's disappearance was the lead story on local news stations. Her school photo, showing a smiling girl with bangs and bright eyes, appeared on television screens across the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. Police issued an urgent public appeal for information about the black pickup truck or its driver. Roadblocks were established, and officers began the painstaking process of interviewing potential witnesses and checking surveillance cameras from nearby businesses. As darkness fell over Arlington that Saturday evening, a profound uneasiness settled over the community. Children who normally might have played outside until called for dinner were kept indoors. Porch lights remained on throughout the night in neighborhoods across the city, some as beacons of hope that Amber might find her way home, others as symbols of solidarity with a family living through every parent's worst nightmare. For 4 days, the search continued with growing intensity. Volunteers gathered each morning at designated meeting points, receiving assigned search areas from law enforcement. Texas Rangers joined the Arlington Police Department in the investigation. The FBI became involved, bringing additional resources and expertise in child abduction cases. Psychologists specializing in offender profiling reviewed the witness statement and crime scene details, attempting to build a picture of who might have taken Amber and where they might have gone. Throughout those days, Donna Whitson appeared before news cameras repeatedly, her eyes revealing the sleepless nights but her voice steady as she pleaded for her daughter's safe return. "Please," she said during one particularly emotional press conference, "if you have her, just let her go. Drop her off at a store or a gas station where someone can help her. She's just a little girl. She needs to come home." The community response continued to grow. Churches held vigils. Local businesses donated supplies for the volunteer search teams. Restaurants provided meals for the family and those involved in the search efforts. A local printing company produced thousands of flyers with Amber's photograph, which volunteers distributed across not just Arlington but surrounding communities as well. Hope remained, though with each passing hour, the statistical reality of child abduction cases cast an increasingly long shadow over those hopes. Law enforcement officials knew, though they didn't emphasize this publicly, that in stranger abductions, time is the most critical factor. The first 24 hours are crucial, and with each day that passes, the chances of finding a child alive diminish significantly. On the fourth day, January 17, 1996, the search came to its tragic conclusion. A man walking his dog discovered a body in a creek bed about 4 miles from where Amber had been abducted. The creek ran behind an apartment complex in North Arlington, an area that search teams had not yet thoroughly explored. Within hours, medical examiners confirmed what the community had feared: they had found Amber Hagerman. The medical examination revealed that Amber had survived for approximately 2 days after her abduction before her life was taken. Out of respect for the family and the nature of our program, I won't detail the specific findings, except to note that evidence indicated she had suffered trauma before her death. These details would become important for investigators trying to build a profile of the perpetrator, but they need not be our focus as we explore this case. When news of the discovery spread through Arlington, the community's grief was profound. The hope that had sustained the search efforts transformed into collective mourning. Schools brought in counselors to help children process the news. Parents held their own children closer. A memorial of stuffed animals, flowers, and handwritten notes began to form near the site where Amber was last seen alive. For the Hagerman family, the pain was immeasurable. "She was the sweetest little girl," Donna told reporters through tears at a press conference following the identification. "I don't understand how anyone could hurt her. She never hurt anybody." The investigation shifted from a rescue mission to a homicide case. A specialized task force was formed, with detectives from multiple agencies working exclusively on finding Amber's killer. They returned to re-examine the crime scene at the abandoned grocery store parking lot. They conducted extensive interviews with residents living near both the abduction site and where Amber's body was found. They sought surveillance footage from every business in the area that might have captured the black pickup truck as it fled with Amber. The witness description remained their most significant lead: a black or dark blue pickup truck, possibly a Ford F-150. A white or Hispanic male, approximately 25 to 40 years old, of medium build. It wasn't much to go on in a metropolitan area where such vehicles were commonplace. Investigators estimated that tens of thousands of similar trucks were registered in the Dallas-Fort Worth area alone. Despite the intensive investigation, weeks passed without a breakthrough. Tips continued to come in, thousands of them, but none led to the identification of a suspect. The case that had captured headlines began to fade from the front pages as the investigation continued without dramatic developments to report. But while the media attention may have diminished, something remarkable was beginning to take shape in the community's response to this tragedy. A transformation was underway, one that would ensure that Amber Hagerman's name would become known across the nation, not just for the tragedy of her death, but for the legacy of protection her case would create for countless other children. In the wake of Amber's murder, as the investigation continued without clear progress, the Dallas-Fort Worth community began asking difficult questions. How could a child be abducted in broad daylight from a public space? Could anything have been done differently? And most importantly, how could similar tragedies be prevented in the future? A few days after Amber's funeral, a woman named Diana Simone, who lived in nearby Dallas, placed a call to KDMX radio station. She didn't know the Hagerman family personally, but as a mother herself, she had been deeply affected by the case. She posed a question to the radio station: "We have severe weather warnings that come across our television screens and interrupt programming. Why can't we do the same thing for abducted children?" It was a simple question, but one with profound implications. The radio station brought the idea to local law enforcement agencies, who recognized its potential immediately. What if media outlets could broadcast immediate information about child abductions, including descriptions of suspects and their vehicles? What if those crucial first hours after an abduction could be filled with thousands of extra eyes watching for the perpetrator? Within months of Amber's murder, Dallas-Fort Worth broadcasters and local law enforcement agencies had formalized a partnership to create what was then called the Dallas Amber Plan, standing for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response, with the name chosen specifically to honor Amber Hagerman. The concept was straightforward but powerful. When a confirmed child abduction occurred, law enforcement would issue an alert with relevant details. Radio and television stations would then broadcast this information immediately, interrupting regular programming if necessary. The plan officially launched in July 1996, just 6 months after Amber's abduction and murder. No one could have predicted how rapidly the concept would spread. Other Texas cities adopted similar plans within months. By 1999, the program had expanded to several states. In 2002, President George W. Bush signed National Amber Alert legislation, creating a nationwide system coordinated by the Department of Justice. Today, all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands have Amber Alert plans in place. The effectiveness of the system has been remarkable. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, as of 2024, more than 1,100 children have been successfully recovered specifically because of Amber Alerts. The system has evolved with technology, from radio and television broadcasts to electronic highway signs, text messages to mobile phones, and notifications on social media platforms. Throughout all this national progress and the many lives saved, the investigation into who killed Amber Hagerman continued without resolution. As months turned into years and years into decades, the case remained open. Investigators continued to follow leads, re-examine evidence, and interview persons of interest. New detectives were assigned to the case as others retired, ensuring that institutional knowledge was preserved and fresh perspectives were applied. Forensic science advanced dramatically in the decades following Amber's murder. DNA analysis capabilities that were in their infancy in 1996 became increasingly sophisticated. In recent years, investigators have re-examined physical evidence from the case using these enhanced technologies, hoping that advanced DNA testing might reveal what traditional methods could not. January 2021 marked the 25th anniversary of Amber's abduction and murder. The Arlington Police Department used the occasion to renew public attention to the case, holding a press conference to request new information. "We believe that someone out there still has knowledge of this terrible crime," said Assistant Chief Kevin Colby. "It may be a burden you've carried for 25 years, or something you overheard, or a suspicion you've never acted upon. Whatever it might be, we urge you to come forward now." The department also revealed that they had preserved tissue samples and items recovered from the crime scene that might yield DNA evidence using modern techniques not available during the original investigation. For Donna Williams, formerly Whitson, Amber's mother, the passing decades have not diminished her determination to find justice for her daughter. She has become an advocate for missing children and child safety education, channeling her grief into efforts that might protect other families from experiencing similar tragedies. "I miss her every day," Donna said at the 25th anniversary press conference. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about what might have been, what she would look like, what she would be doing with her life now. But what keeps me going is knowing that her legacy has saved so many other children through the Amber Alert system. Indeed, that legacy is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this tragic case. From the worst moment a family could experience came a system that has spared hundreds of other families from similar pain. The Amber Alert has become so embedded in American society that many younger adults today have never known a world without it. The distinctive alert tone on mobile phones, the emergency messages that interrupt television programming, the electronic highway signs displaying vehicle information, all these now familiar elements of our public safety infrastructure trace their origins back to a single abduction in Arlington, Texas. The case of Amber Hagerman reminds us that even in our darkest moments, seeds of positive change can take root. It demonstrates how a community's response to tragedy can transform grief into action and eventually into protection for vulnerable children across an entire nation. As for the investigation itself, it continues. The Arlington Police Department maintains an active case file. The reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction has increased over the years. Detectives still regularly review the evidence, follow up on new tips, and incorporate advances in forensic science into their investigative approach. Perhaps most importantly, they have never forgotten the little girl at the center of it all, Amber Hagerman, who would now be in her mid-30s had her life not been cut short on that January day in 1996. Her photograph still hangs in the Arlington Police Department, a reminder of an injustice still unresolved and a promise still unfulfilled. For anyone with information about this case, no matter how seemingly insignificant, the Arlington Police Department continues to maintain a dedicated tip line. Even after all these years, a single memory, a small detail previously unreported, could be the key that finally brings resolution to this case and answers to a family that has waited far too long. As we draw our story to a close tonight, we're left with both the weight of an unsolved crime and the inspiration of a tragic loss transformed into a powerful force for good. Amber Hagerman's life was brief, but her legacy continues to grow with each child brought home safely because of the alert system that bears her name. In the quiet darkness as you drift toward sleep, perhaps take a moment to reflect on how a single voice, like Diana Simone's call to that radio station, can spark a change that reverberates across an entire nation. And perhaps remember Amber, not just as a victim of an unsolved crime, but as the catalyst for a movement that has saved hundreds of young lives. If you're still awake, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's move on to our next story. Story 2. Clinton Bonnell was a man of discipline and honor, wearing his accomplishments with quiet dignity. Born and raised in a small North Carolina town, he grew up with a sense of purpose that set him apart. Excelling in both academics and athletics, he graduated near the top of his class in high school. His natural discipline and commitment to service led him to enlist in the U.S. Army, where he earned the prestigious title of Green Beret, a recognition reserved for those demonstrating the highest level of skill, resilience, and dedication. After retiring from his remarkable military career, Clinton embraced a new dream of becoming a physician assistant, channeling his determination into serving others in a different capacity. But on January 27, 2025, his life took a mysterious and tragic turn. Clinton vanished without a trace, his absence as sudden as it was baffling. Days turned into weeks as the search for answers grew increasingly desperate. Then, in February, a discovery was made, a chilling revelation that shattered the quiet serenity of a rural pond and unearthed a story no one could have foreseen. For over a decade, Clinton served his country, carrying out missions in some of the world's most volatile regions. His military record was marked by commendations for bravery and leadership. To his comrades, he was an unwavering pillar of strength. To his family, he was a loving husband and father. Despite the intensity of his military career, Clinton made time for the little things: weekend barbecues, coaching his son's soccer games, and teaching his daughter to ride her bike. By 2025, Clinton had retired from active duty and was charting a new course for his life. He had enrolled in a rigorous program to become a physician assistant, a role he believed would allow him to continue serving others, this time in the medical field. His classmates remembered him as focused and humble, often staying late after class to help others study. At home, Clinton was balancing his ambitions with the challenges of a strained marriage. Friends said he was optimistic about his future, despite the difficulties. January 27, 2025, began as an ordinary day. Clinton had breakfast with his children before driving them to school. Neighbors saw him return home around mid-morning, his usual calm demeanor betraying nothing unusual. But as the day went on, something changed. Calls and messages to Clinton went unanswered, a rarity for the man who was always reliable. Shauna Cloud, his wife and soon-to-be ex, later told police she had no idea where Clinton was. They had been living in the same house during their separation, a tense arrangement that only added to the complexities of their relationship. While friends of Clinton reported that he had confided in them about the difficulties he faced at home, he had never expressed fear for his safety. As hours turned to days, concern grew. Clinton's family reported him missing, triggering a search effort that spanned the local area. His car was found abandoned in a remote spot several miles from their home, an unsettling clue that only deepened the mystery. Inside the vehicle, investigators found personal items that Clinton was unlikely to leave behind, including his phone and wallet. The community rallied together, organizing search parties and distributing flyers. Clinton's former military colleagues reached out to offer assistance, leveraging their skills and networks to support the effort. But despite these efforts, no trace of Clinton was found. Nearly a month after Clinton's disappearance, a local fisherman made a grim discovery. While casting his line in a rural pond not far from where Clinton's car had been found, he noticed something unusual beneath the water's surface. What he initially thought was debris turned out to be far more disturbing. Authorities were called to the scene, and the pond was soon cordoned off. As forensic divers entered the water, the extent of the discovery became clear. Clinton's dismembered remains were retrieved from the pond, sending shockwaves through the community. The serene body of water, once a tranquil retreat, was now a haunting crime scene. The condition of the remains suggested an effort to obscure the crime. Investigators noted that the placement of the body parts and the remote location of the pond indicated a calculated attempt to delay or prevent discovery. The cause of death was later determined to be blunt force trauma, further deepening the horror of the crime. For Clinton's family, the discovery marked the end of hope and the beginning of a quest for justice. As the news spread, the community's grief was matched only by its outrage. How could a man who had dedicated his life to protecting others meet such a brutal end? The search for answers was just beginning. The discovery of Clinton Bunnell's remains marked the beginning of an exhaustive investigation. The once peaceful pond became a crime scene, roped off and guarded as forensic experts worked to collect every possible piece of evidence. Investigators knew the complexity of the case meant they had to proceed methodically. Initial wellness checks at Clinton's home had been conducted in the days after his disappearance, but those yielded little insight. His military background and stoic nature made it challenging to determine whether his disappearance was voluntary or foul play. However, with the discovery of Clinton's body, law enforcement turned their focus squarely onto the possibility of murder. Search warrants were immediately obtained for the family home and surrounding areas, ensuring every corner of Clinton's life could be scrutinized. Detectives worked around the clock, poring over both physical evidence and digital footprints in their quest for answers. As investigators entered the Bonnell household, they were greeted by the hollow silence of a home in turmoil. Clinton's belongings remained where he had last left them, neatly arranged, as if he planned to return at any moment. But closer inspection painted a different picture. In the living room, shards of broken glass were scattered across the floor near a damaged lamp. The fragments suggested a violent incident had occurred. Further evidence emerged when trace amounts of blood were found near the doorway and inside the garage. These traces were later confirmed to belong to Clinton, solidifying the theory that the house may have been the scene of the initial attack. Forensic teams meticulously documented every detail of the house, noting the peculiar lack of attempts to clean up the damaged items or the blood stains. The disarray contradicted Shauna Cloud's claim that the household had been calm in the days following Clinton's disappearance. Investigators were now tasked with determining how a crime committed in a suburban neighborhood had gone unnoticed by neighbors and family members. The investigation began to accelerate as evidence came to light. One of the most crucial breakthroughs came from Clinton's phone, which had been found abandoned in his car alongside his wallet and other personal items. This phone became a treasure trove of information for forensic analysts. They found text messages exchanged between Clinton and Shauna that revealed the growing tensions in their relationship. Clinton had repeatedly discussed his plans for a peaceful separation, including financial arrangements and custody of their children. Shauna's responses, however, suggested hostility and resentment. In one message, she accused Clinton of prioritizing his career over his family, while in another, she hinted at taking drastic measures to ensure she would get what she deserved. Digital forensic analysis extended beyond the phone, delving into Shauna's online activity. Investigators discovered disturbing search queries made on her computer in the weeks leading up to Clinton's disappearance. Searches such as, "How to hide a crime" and "Pawned locations near me" painted a chilling picture. These searches, combined with the timeline reconstructed from GPS data, pointed directly toward Shauna's involvement. Further evidence emerged from surveillance footage obtained from nearby businesses. Cameras captured Clinton's car traveling toward the rural area on the day of his disappearance. What struck investigators was the presence of a second vehicle following closely behind. This vehicle, later identified as belonging to Shauna Cloud, became a key focus of the investigation. The footage showed both cars heading toward the area where Clinton's remains were eventually found, but only Shauna's vehicle returning. Additional insights came from the financial records. Clinton had recently withdrawn a significant sum of money, which investigators initially speculated could be linked to extortion or threats. However, interviews with his colleagues and friends revealed that Clinton had no concerns about his safety, leading detectives to consider whether the withdrawal was coerced. Shauna's financial activity during the same period revealed no deposits matching the withdrawn amount, raising more questions about her intentions and actions. Shauna Cloud quickly became the prime suspect in the investigation. Her behavior during the days following Clinton's disappearance raised immediate suspicions. While she initially appeared cooperative, offering information about Clinton's habits and routines, her demeanor shifted noticeably as the investigation deepened. Detectives observed her growing unease when asked about her movements on January 27, the day Clinton vanished. Her alibi, that she had spent the day running errands, fell apart under scrutiny. GPS data from her phone placed her near the location of Clinton's abandoned car and the pond where his body was discovered. This inconsistency became a focal point for investigators. Interviews with neighbors and friends revealed a troubling pattern in Shauna's recent behavior. She had reportedly expressed frustration and anger over the couple's impending divorce, particularly the financial strain it placed on her. Friends described Shauna as emotionally volatile, noting heated arguments between her and Clinton in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. Clinton's colleagues also reported that he had confided in them about the challenges of living under the same roof as Shauna during their separation. While he expressed hope for an amicable resolution, he acknowledged the tension between them. In questioning, Shauna's explanations grew increasingly inconsistent. She struggled to account for the timeline of her movements on the day of Clinton's disappearance and offered vague responses when asked about the condition of the family home. Detectives noted that her answers seemed rehearsed, yet contradictory, further fueling suspicions of her involvement. By this point, the evidence against Shauna was mounting. Digital data, physical traces, and her shifting behavior all pointed toward her complicity in the crime. Investigators worked diligently to ensure every lead was thoroughly examined, knowing that the case hinged on presenting a compelling narrative supported by irrefutable evidence. March 28, 2025, marked a decisive moment in the investigation as law enforcement officials officially arrested Shauna Cloud. The arrest was executed following weeks of tireless work by detectives, forensic analysts, and legal teams. Shauna was apprehended at her residence, the same home she had shared with Clinton Bonnell, even as their marriage fell apart. Officers arrived early in the morning, ensuring the operation proceeded smoothly and without incident. Shauna, who had maintained her innocence until this point, appeared visibly shaken as she was escorted out of her home in handcuffs. The arrest wasn't just the culmination of an investigation, it was the beginning of her journey through the justice system. Officials cited mounting evidence as the basis for Shauna's arrest. The digital data recovered from her devices, her GPS records, the surveillance footage showing her vehicle near the pond, and the traces of blood found inside the family home all contributed to a case that prosecutors were confident would hold up in court. The arrest warrant explicitly stated the charges: first-degree murder and concealment of death, leaving little doubt about the severity of the accusations against her. The community watched closely as news outlets broadcast the scene of her arrest, with headlines capturing the gravity of the allegations and the shocking twists in the case. Shauna Cloud faced two primary charges: first-degree murder and concealment of death. The charge of first-degree murder implied that investigators believed Shauna had planned and carried out the killing of her estranged husband, Clinton Bonnell, with premeditation. This charge carried the possibility of life imprisonment or even the death penalty under North Carolina law, reflecting the severity of the crime. The concealment of death charge highlighted the calculated effort involved in disposing of Clinton's remains in a remote pond. Prosecutors alleged that Shauna had not only killed Clinton but had also gone to great lengths to cover up her actions, delaying the discovery of the crime and complicating the investigation. This charge carried additional penalties, underscoring the impact of her attempts to obscure the truth. Legal experts speculated on how the case would unfold, noting the strength of the evidence gathered by investigators. The text messages exchanged between Shauna and Clinton suggested a motive rooted in marital discord, while her internet search history pointed directly to her involvement. The physical evidence, including the blood stains found in the family home, further reinforced the prosecution's argument. Together, these elements painted a picture of premeditation, intent, and subsequent concealment. Shauna Cloud's first court appearance came shortly after her arrest. During the arraignment, she stood before the judge in a stark courtroom, her demeanor alternating between defiance and unease. She pleaded not guilty to both charges, setting the stage for what would become a highly publicized legal battle. The prosecutor outlined the evidence against her, arguing that the case was built on a solid foundation of forensic and digital data. As the legal proceedings progressed, the prosecution presented a chilling narrative of the crime. They detailed how Shauna's online searches demonstrated intent, how her movements placed her at the scene of the crime, and how the physical evidence tied her actions to the timeline of Clinton's disappearance and death. Witness testimonies from friends, family, and neighbors highlighted the tensions in Shauna and Clinton's marriage, providing context for the motive behind the crime. The defense, however, sought to undermine the prosecution's case by challenging the validity of the evidence. They argued that the GPS data could be inconclusive, that the blood stains could have been unrelated, and that the surveillance footage didn't definitively prove Shauna's involvement. Her legal team emphasized the circumstantial nature of much of the evidence, aiming to cast doubt in the minds of the jury. As the trial unfolded, courtroom observers noted the emotional toll on Clinton's family, who attended each session seeking justice for their loved one. The proceedings revealed the complexities of the case, with both sides presenting their arguments and evidence in painstaking detail. The community followed the trial closely, with many expressing frustration over the defense's attempts to refute what they saw as clear evidence of Shauna's guilt. The arrest and trial of Shauna Cloud left a profound impact on the community, Clinton Bonnell's family, and all who had been touched by the case. For Clinton's family, the journey was one of heartbreak and resilience. They spoke openly about the pain of losing a man who had dedicated his life to service and the challenges of coping with the brutal nature of his death. His children, now left without their father, became a symbol of the lasting damage caused by the crime. The community rallied around Clinton's family, offering support through vigils, fundraisers, and expressions of solidarity. Many felt the case had shattered the illusion of safety in their quiet town, serving as a grim reminder of how domestic tensions could escalate into unimaginable violence. Public discussions about the case often reflected broader concerns about addressing family conflict and preventing tragedies like this one in the future. For law enforcement, the case highlighted the importance of thorough investigation and collaboration across agencies. The detectives involved were commended for their persistence and skill, particularly in navigating the complexities of digital evidence and forensic analysis. The successful arrest and trial demonstrated the critical role of technology in modern investigations and served as a benchmark for future cases. In the end, the case of Clinton Bonnell and Shauna Cloud became more than a story of crime and justice. It became a cautionary tale about the consequences of unresolved conflict, the impact of violence on families and communities, and the enduring quest for truth. For those who followed the case, its lessons were both sobering and unforgettable. Clinton Bonnell lived a life of courage and purpose, qualities that defined his years as a Green Beret and his aspirations to heal others in the medical field. But his untimely death forces us to confront difficult questions. What drives someone to cross the line into violence? What warning signs are we missing in our relationships, our communities? These questions resonate far beyond this case, touching on the universal struggle to understand the darkness that can reside within human nature. Could Clinton's life have been saved if someone had intervened earlier? Could the cracks in his marriage have been mended, or at least addressed before escalating into tragedy? These are questions we must wrestle with, not to rewrite history, but to learn from it. This story is one of loss, heartbreak, and the fight for justice, but it is also a story of resilience. We owe it to Clinton and others like him to reflect on the lessons these tragedies leave behind. How do we build better systems of support? How do we ensure we notice the signs before it's too late? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every perspective adds something valuable to the conversation. Story 3. Our story begins on a warm August night in 2013, when a 26-year-old oil field worker named Brandon Lawson seemingly vanished into the Texas night, leaving behind a cryptic 911 call and countless unanswered questions. What happened on that desolate stretch of highway has remained a mystery for years, with theories ranging from foul play to voluntary disappearance. San Angelo, Texas sits in the western part of the state, about 200 miles northwest of San Antonio. It's known for its hot summers and relatively mild winters, with vast expanses of farmland and oil fields stretching across the landscape. The region is characterized by its open spaces, scattered small towns, and long, lonely highways that connect them. In 2013, Brandon Lawson was living in San Angelo with his girlfriend Ledessa Lofton and their children. At 26 years old, Brandon worked long hours in the oil fields to support his family. He was described by those who knew him as hardworking and devoted to his loved ones, though like many of us, he had his struggles and complexities. The specific area where our story unfolds is along U.S. Highway 277, a rural stretch of road between San Angelo and Bronte, Texas. This highway cuts through sparsely populated farmland and ranchland, with few buildings or services along certain stretches. At night, it becomes particularly isolated, with the darkness broken only occasionally by passing vehicles or distant farmhouse lights. It's the kind of road where cell phone reception can be spotty and help might be miles away. On the night of August 8, 2013, this ordinary stretch of Texas highway would become the setting for an extraordinary mystery, one that would capture attention across the country and remain unsolved for years to come. Brandon's background, 10 to 1500 hours. Rain sounds continue, slightly softer. To understand what happened that night, we should first understand more about Brandon Lawson himself. Born in 1986, Brandon grew up in West Texas. By age 26, he had established himself as a dedicated provider for his family. He and Ledessa had been together for nearly a decade, sharing 3 children together, and Brandon was also a father figure to Ledessa's child from a previous relationship. Brandon worked as an oil field worker, a demanding job common in that region of Texas. The oil industry in West Texas often requires long hours, physical labor, and sometimes weeks away from home. It's the kind of work that provides well for families but can also take a toll on relationships and personal well-being. Like many people, Brandon had faced some challenges in his past. He had previous run-ins with the law, including issues related to possession of marijuana. At the time of his disappearance, he had an outstanding warrant for possession charges, which would later become relevant to theories about his disappearance. By August 2013, Brandon and Ledessa's relationship had been experiencing some strain. The stress of managing a household, raising children, and working demanding jobs had created tension between them. This context is important not to cast judgment, but to understand the circumstances surrounding the night Brandon disappeared. Despite these challenges, friends and family described Brandon as committed to his family. He wasn't known to disappear for long periods, which made the events of August 8 all the more baffling to those who knew him well. Thursday, August 8, 2013 began as an ordinary day. Brandon went to work at the oil fields, returning home in the evening. According to later accounts from Ledessa, the couple had an argument that night, the kind of disagreement that happens in many relationships. The exact nature of their argument wasn't unusual or exceptional, but it was enough that Brandon decided to cool off by leaving the house. Around midnight, Brandon told Ledessa he was going to drive to his father's house in Crowley, about 180 miles away. This decision to leave in the middle of the night might seem unusual, but those close to Brandon noted that late-night drives weren't completely out of character for him. Working oil field shifts often meant becoming accustomed to unusual hours. Before leaving, Brandon called his father to let him know he planned to visit. He gathered a few belongings and got into his truck, a 1998 Chevy Silverado. The truck wasn't in perfect condition, it had been having some mechanical issues. Brandon knew he would need to refuel before making the long journey to Crowley. As Brandon pulled away from his home in San Angelo, the night was warm, around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, typical for Texas in August. The sky was clear, with a quarter moon providing minimal illumination over the landscape. He headed east on U.S. Highway 277, the most direct route toward his father's home. At approximately 12:30 a.m., now technically August 9th, Brandon called his brother Kyle. He informed Kyle that he was making the drive to their father's house and mentioned that he was running low on gas. Kyle, concerned about his brother being stranded in the middle of the night, agreed to bring a gas can to help Brandon refuel. They arranged to meet along Highway 277, where Brandon would wait for his brother's assistance. These final normal moments, a family disagreement, a decision to visit a parent, a call to a brother for help, would be the last ordinary parts of what was about to become an extraordinary and perplexing series of events. At approximately 12:50 a.m., Brandon Lawson placed a call to 911 from somewhere along Highway 277. The recording of this call would later become a crucial and enigmatic piece of evidence in understanding what happened to him. When the dispatcher answered, Brandon's words were somewhat difficult to understand, partially due to a poor connection and his seemingly distressed state. What he said has been transcribed in various ways, but the generally accepted version goes something like this. "Yes, I'm in the middle of a field. A state trooper just pulled some guys over. I ran into them, right here going towards Abilene on both sides. My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. The guy's chasing me into the woods. Please hurry." The dispatcher asked for clarification, but the connection was poor. Brandon mentioned something about needing police, but parts of the conversation remained unclear or unintelligible. The call disconnected, and despite the dispatcher's attempts to call back, there was no answer. This 911 call raises several immediate questions. Who were the guys Brandon mentioned? Was there actually a state trooper present? Who was chasing him, and why had he left his vehicle to go into a field or woods? The call suggests Brandon was frightened and possibly in danger, but the fragmented nature of the communication makes it difficult to determine exactly what was happening. One thing is clear, Brandon believed he needed help, and he was no longer on the highway with his truck. Instead, he described being in the middle of a field and mentioned woods. This rural area of Texas does have scattered vegetation and uneven terrain, though not dense forest. It would be possible for someone to walk away from the highway and quickly become difficult to see, especially at night. This mysterious call would be the last confirmed communication from Brandon Lawson. Shortly after Brandon's 911 call, around 1:10 a.m., his brother Kyle arrived at the location where Brandon's truck was parked. The Chevy Silverado was found on the side of Highway 277, about 4 miles outside of Bronte, Texas. It was positioned at an angle just off the roadway, as if Brandon had pulled over in a hurry. The truck was indeed out of gas, confirming that part of Brandon's story. Kyle didn't find Brandon with the truck or anywhere immediately visible. Concerned, he called LaDessa to see if she had heard from Brandon. She hadn't. Adding to the worry, Kyle noticed that Brandon's cell phone wasn't in the truck, but his wallet was still there. His boots were also missing, suggesting he had walked away from the vehicle. While Kyle was still at the scene, a Coke County Sheriff's deputy arrived. The officer had been dispatched following a report of an abandoned vehicle that could be a traffic hazard. When the deputy ran the truck's plates, he discovered Brandon's outstanding warrant. This would later lead some to speculate that Brandon might have hidden from law enforcement due to fear of arrest. However, the deputy wasn't aware of the 911 call Brandon had made earlier, a critical communication gap that would later be questioned in the investigation. The deputy spoke with Kyle, who explained that he was there to bring gas to his brother. The officer helped Kyle secure the truck off the roadway but didn't initiate a search for Brandon at that time, as there wasn't yet a formal missing person report. Kyle, growing increasingly worried, searched the immediate area but found no sign of his brother. He eventually went home, assuming Brandon might have gotten a ride from someone else or would contact them soon. By the next day, when Brandon still hadn't made contact with anyone, his family began to worry in earnest. LaDessa filed a missing person report with the San Angelo Police Department on August 10, about 36 hours after Brandon's last known communication. With an official report filed, a more thorough search began. Law enforcement returned to the area where Brandon's truck had been found. They brought in search dogs and began combing through the surrounding fields and brush. Volunteers from the community, along with Brandon's family members, joined in these efforts. The search area was challenging, flat in some places but with ravines, small creeks, and areas of thick brush in others. Despite these efforts, no significant clues to Brandon's whereabouts were discovered in the initial searches. As days passed without any sign of Brandon, the investigation began to expand. Authorities reviewed the 911 call multiple times, trying to decipher the unclear portions and understand exactly what Brandon had been experiencing. They confirmed that a state trooper had indeed made a traffic stop in the general area that night, but it was unclear if this was connected to Brandon's situation. Investigators interviewed everyone who had contact with Brandon in the hours before his disappearance. They spoke with LaDessa about their argument, with Kyle about their phone conversations, and with Brandon's father about the planned visit. They also checked with Brandon's co-workers and friends to see if he had mentioned any concerns or plans to any of them. Cell phone records became a crucial part of the investigation. Brandon's phone never connected to a cell tower after his 911 call. The last known location data placed his phone in the general vicinity of where his truck was found. This suggested that either his phone battery died, the phone was destroyed, or it was taken to an area without service. Law enforcement conducted multiple follow-up searches of the area, expanding the perimeter each time. They used different search methods, including helicopter sweeps, ATVs for covering rough terrain, and additional search dogs. They checked nearby bodies of water, abandoned structures, and the many oil field locations that dot that region of Texas. A particular area of interest was a river not far from where Brandon's truck was found. The Colorado River runs near that stretch of Highway 277, and some speculated that Brandon might have become disoriented in the dark, fallen into the water, and been swept away. Divers searched sections of the river, but no evidence was found. As weeks passed without results, the case began to attract media attention beyond the local area. Brandon's family worked tirelessly to keep his case in the public eye, creating social media pages dedicated to finding him and giving interviews to any news outlet that would cover the story. Despite these extensive efforts, the investigation yielded few concrete leads. Brandon Lawson had seemingly vanished without a trace on that August night. As with many mysterious disappearances, numerous theories emerged to explain what might have happened to Brandon Lawson. Each has its supporters and detractors, and none has been definitively proven or disproven. The first and perhaps most straightforward theory is that Brandon became disoriented after leaving his truck, possibly due to the darkness and unfamiliar surroundings, and suffered some kind of accident. The terrain in that area, while not extreme, does have hazards, uneven ground, barbed wire fences, and the nearby Colorado River. In the dark, it would be easy to become injured or even fall into a body of water. Supporters of this theory point to the lack of evidence suggesting foul play and the fact that the area where Brandon disappeared is remote enough that an injured person might not be easily found. A second theory centers on Brandon's outstanding warrant. Some speculate that when he saw the sheriff's deputy approaching his truck, he hid to avoid arrest. Once the officer left, Brandon may have attempted to walk to a nearby town or find another ride, becoming lost or injured in the process. The presence of the warrant does provide a potential motive for Brandon to avoid law enforcement, though it doesn't fully explain why he would completely disappear rather than eventually contact his family. A third possibility involves the mysterious guise Brandon mentioned in his 911 call. Some believe Brandon may have encountered something illicit happening on that remote stretch of highway, perhaps drug trafficking or some other criminal activity. In this scenario, the people involved might have pursued Brandon to prevent him from reporting what he saw. This theory is supported by Brandon's apparent fear during the 911 call but lacks physical evidence or identified suspects. Some have also suggested that Brandon's disappearance might have been voluntary, that he chose to leave his life behind. However, those who knew him best consistently reject this idea, pointing to his close relationship with his children and lack of preparation for such a departure. He left behind his wallet and had made specific plans to visit his father, actions inconsistent with someone planning to disappear. Another consideration is the possibility that Brandon was experiencing some kind of medical or psychological crisis. The stress of work, family responsibilities, and his legal issues could potentially have contributed to unusual behavior or impaired decision-making. However, there's no specific evidence that Brandon was experiencing such issues on the night he disappeared. Each of these theories has strengths and weaknesses, and the truth may involve elements from multiple scenarios or something entirely different that hasn't been considered. In the months and years following Brandon's disappearance, his case continued to evolve. His family never stopped searching for answers. They maintained active social media campaigns, participated in interviews, and worked with various missing persons organizations to keep attention on Brandon's case. In 2014, Brandon's family conducted their own large-scale search of the area, bringing in volunteers and private search experts. These efforts, while not producing definitive answers, demonstrated the family's unwavering commitment to finding out what happened to Brandon. The case also attracted the attention of amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts across the country. Online forums and discussion groups analyzed every aspect of the case, from the 911 call audio to maps of the area to statements from everyone involved. While some of these discussions produced interesting perspectives, none led to a breakthrough in the case. In 2018, approximately 5 years after Brandon's disappearance, law enforcement conducted another search of the area using more advanced technology. This search included ground-penetrating radar in some locations and more sophisticated aerial imaging. Again, no definitive evidence of Brandon's fate was discovered. Over time, Brandon's story has been featured on various true crime podcasts, YouTube channels, and television shows focused on missing persons cases. Each new coverage brings renewed interest and sometimes new tips, though none have led to Brandon being found. One persistent challenge in this case has been the passage of time and its effect on the search area. Weather, development, and natural changes to the landscape have potentially altered or obscured evidence that might have been present in 2013. Additionally, human memory becomes less reliable over time, making witness statements from years after the event less valuable to investigators. Despite these challenges, Brandon's case remains open. Law enforcement agencies continue to accept and investigate tips, and his family continues to hope for answers. As this story comes to a close, the mystery of what happened to Brandon Lawson on that August night in 2013 remains unsolved. Somewhere between San Angelo and Bronte, Texas, a young father vanished, leaving behind a puzzling 911 call and a family that continues to search for answers. This case reminds us of how quickly ordinary lives can take extraordinary turns, and how fragile our connections to each other can be. One moment, Brandon was driving down a familiar highway, and the next, he had vanished into the Texas night. If you're still awake, I hope this exploration of Brandon's case has provided food for thought. If you've drifted off to sleep, may your dreams be peaceful. If you found this helpful for falling asleep, please consider subscribing to this channel and turning on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Story 4. This story begins on a warm summer night in June 1992, when a mother, her daughter, and her daughter's friend seemingly vanished without a trace from a small home on East Del Mar Street in Springfield. No signs of struggle, few clues left behind, and 3 lives suddenly interrupted, leaving a community in shock and families searching for answers that remain elusive even today. Springfield, Missouri sits in the southwestern part of the state, nestled in the Ozark Mountains. Often called the Queen City of the Ozarks, it's the 3rd largest city in Missouri, though in 1992 it maintained much of its small-town character despite its population of around 140,000 people. It's a place where neighbors know each other, where community matters, and where violent crime was relatively uncommon, which made the events of June 1992 all the more shocking. The specific neighborhood where our story unfolds is located near the center of Springfield, not far from Missouri State University, which was then known as Southwest Missouri State. It's an area with modest, well-kept homes, tree-lined streets, and a mix of long-time residents and college students. The house at 1717 East Del Mar Street was a small, one-story home with white siding and dark shutters, unassuming and similar to many others on the block. June in Missouri brings warm days and mild nights. The landscape is lush and green, with flowers blooming in carefully tended gardens. Thunderstorms are common in early summer, bringing cooling rain to break the humidity. The rhythm of life slows somewhat as schools let out for summer break and families adjust to different routines. In this seemingly peaceful setting, 3 women were about to become the center of one of America's most baffling mysteries. Their names were Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, 3 individuals with different stories who would become forever linked by the events of a single night. Cheryl Levitt was 47 years old in 1992, a hairdresser who owned her own salon. She was described by those who knew her as independent, hardworking, and devoted to her only daughter, Susie. She had purchased the home on East Del Mar Street a few years earlier, creating a comfortable life for herself and Susie. Friends described Cheryl as meticulous and security-conscious, not the type of person to leave doors unlocked or to go anywhere without telling someone. Susie Streeter, Cheryl's daughter, was 19 years old. She had just graduated from Kickapoo High School the day before she disappeared. Susie was outgoing and sociable with a wide circle of friends. She worked at a local movie theater and had plans to attend cosmetology school like her mother. Stacy McCall, also 19, was Susie's friend and classmate who had also just graduated from Kickapoo High School. Stacy was described as responsible and level-headed. She lived with her parents, Janice and Stuart McCall, and had plans to attend Missouri State University in the fall to study business. These 3 women, a mother beginning a new chapter as her daughter graduated high school, and 2 young women with their adult lives just beginning, would vanish without explanation, leaving behind a mystery that continues to haunt Springfield and true crime enthusiasts around the world. Saturday, June 6, 1992, was a day of celebration in Springfield. Hundreds of students from Kickapoo High School, including Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall, gathered at the Hammond Student Center at Southwest Missouri State University for their graduation ceremony. Dressed in caps and gowns, they accepted their diplomas as proud parents, including Cheryl Levitt and Janice and Stuart McCall, watched from the audience. After the ceremony, the new graduates scattered to various parties across town to celebrate this milestone. Susie and Stacy, along with several other friends, had plans to attend several graduation parties before ending the night at a hotel in Branson, Missouri, a popular tourist town about 40 miles south of Springfield. They had planned this trip as a way to celebrate their graduation, intending to visit the Whitewater Park the following day. The girls spent the evening moving between several graduation parties. They were seen by dozens of people throughout the night, all of whom later reported that both Susie and Stacy seemed to be in good spirits, enjoying their celebration. There was nothing to suggest that anything unusual was happening or about to happen. As the night progressed, however, the girls altered their plans. According to later accounts, the parties they attended were overcrowded, and they decided against driving to Branson so late at night. Instead, at around 2 a.m. on June 7, Susie and Stacy arrived at the home of their friend Janelle Kirby. They stayed only briefly before deciding they were too tired to continue celebrating. Stacy called her mother, Janice McCall, at approximately 2:15 a.m. to let her know that their plans had changed. Rather than driving to Branson that night, Stacy told her mother that she and Susie would be staying at Susie's house on East Delmar Street and would go to Branson the following morning. Janice later recalled that this phone call was completely normal. Stacy sounded tired but happy, and she was being responsible by letting her parents know about her change in plans. After leaving Janelle's house, Susie and Stacy drove to 1717 East Delmar Street, arriving sometime around 2:30 a.m. on Sunday, June 7. Cheryl Levitt, Susie's mother, was at home. She had not attended the parties with the girls but had been waiting for her daughter to return home. Neighbors would later report seeing the girls' cars, Stacy's Toyota Corolla and Susie's Ford Escort, parked in the driveway that night. What happened after Susie and Stacy arrived at the house remains unknown. There were no reports of unusual sounds, no calls for help, and no signs of disturbance noticed by neighbors. The quiet neighborhood on East Delmar Street went through the night as it always did, with residents sleeping peacefully, unaware that by morning, 3 women would be missing without a trace. This ordinary graduation day, filled with accomplishment and celebration, would be the last time anyone would see Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall. The events that followed would transform a day of joy into the beginning of an enduring mystery. The morning of Sunday, June 7, 1992, began like any other summer day in Springfield. But for the friends and family of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy, it would quickly become apparent that something was terribly wrong. Janelle Kirby, the friend whom Susie and Stacy had visited the night before, had made plans to meet the 2 girls at Susie's house that morning. They were supposed to continue their graduation celebration by driving to Branson together for a day at Whitewater Park. When Janelle and her boyfriend arrived at the house on East Delmar Street at around 8 a.m., they immediately noticed something unusual. The porch light was broken, with glass scattered on the front steps. Thinking nothing more of it than simple vandalism, they knocked on the door. When no one answered, they tried the door and found it unlocked. This was their first indication that something might be amiss, as Cheryl was known to be vigilant about home security. Janelle and her boyfriend entered the house, calling out for their friends. What they discovered inside was both ordinary and deeply unsettling. The house appeared undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. Cheryl's cigarettes and lighter were on the kitchen table. The women's purses were lined up on the floor, containing their credit cards, money, and identification. Stacy's shorts and shirt were neatly folded by her shoes. The family dog, a Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, was in the house and appeared anxious. The television was on, tuned to a static channel. Most significantly, all 3 women seemed to have vanished. Their cars were still in the driveway. Their personal belongings remained in the house. There was no note explaining their absence, no sign of where they might have gone. Confused and increasingly concerned, Janelle and her boyfriend left and returned later that morning. When they still couldn't locate their friends, they contacted Stacy's mother, Janice McCall. Janice had been expecting a call from her daughter that morning about their plans to go to Branson. When she hadn't heard from Stacy, she had begun to worry. After receiving the call from Janelle, Janice went to the house on East Delmar Street herself. She too was struck by the eerie normalcy of the scene, everything in its place except for the three women who should have been there. By early afternoon, with no word from any of the missing women and no explanation for their absence, Janice McCall called the Springfield Police Department to report her daughter missing. Initially, the police were not overly concerned. The women were adults, there were no signs of foul play, and it had been less than 24 hours since they were last seen. The officer suggested that perhaps the women had changed their plans and gone somewhere else. But Janice knew her daughter. Stacy was responsible and would have called if her plans had changed. Similarly, those who knew Cheryl Levitt insisted that she would never leave without telling anyone, especially not with a graduation celebration planned for the day. As the hours passed with no contact from any of the three women, it became increasingly clear that their disappearance was not voluntary. By that evening, the Springfield Police Department had launched a formal investigation into the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, the beginning of a case that would grow to involve multiple law enforcement agencies, thousands of tips, and decades of searching without resolution. As concern for the missing women grew, the Springfield Police Department began a more thorough examination of the house on East Delmar Street. Detectives noted several peculiar details that deepened the mystery. The broken porch light that Janelle had noticed that morning seemed to have been deliberately shattered, with the glass carefully swept into a neat pile. This suggested that someone had taken the time to clean up after breaking the light, an unusual action for a vandal or intruder in a hurry. Inside, 3 beds appeared to have been slept in, suggesting that all 3 women had gone to bed at some point that night. The bed covers were pulled back, as if they had gotten up normally. In the bathroom, they found a damp shower seat and towels that appeared to have been used recently. Perhaps most tellingly, the women's personal belongings seemed untouched. All 3 purses were in the house, containing wallets, money, credit cards, and identification. Cheryl's cigarettes and lighter remained on the kitchen table. Clothing, jewelry, and other valuables were undisturbed. Stacy's car keys were found in her purse, while the whereabouts of Cheryl's and Susie's keys remained unknown. The answering machine in the house contained a strange message that had been recorded at some point during the night or early morning. Unfortunately, this potential clue was lost when a friend or family member inadvertently erased it while checking messages. The person who heard it described it as weird or strange, but couldn't recall specific details, a frustrating loss of what might have been valuable evidence. Police found no signs of forced entry into the home. The doors had been unlocked when Janelle arrived that morning, but whether they had been left unlocked all night or unlocked from the inside remained unclear. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, broken items, or bloodstains that would indicate violent abduction. The women's vehicles, Stacy's Toyota Corolla and Susie's Ford Escort, were still parked outside the house. Cheryl's car, a Dodge Caravan, was also present. This suggested that if the women had left, they had not done so in their own vehicles. As word of the disappearances spread through Springfield, police began interviewing friends, family members, co-workers, and anyone who might have information about the women's whereabouts or state of mind before they vanished. They learned that Cheryl had been on the phone with a friend until about 10 p.m. on Saturday night, discussing plans for painting kitchen cabinets. The friend reported that Cheryl had sounded perfectly normal during this conversation and had given no indication that anything was amiss. Several people had seen Susie and Stacy at various graduation parties throughout Saturday evening and into the early hours of Sunday. All reported that the girls seemed happy and were behaving normally. Stacy's call to her mother at 2:15 a.m. to explain their change in plans was described as routine, with Stacy sounding tired but otherwise fine. No one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual on East Delmar Street during the night. No screams, no sounds of struggle, no unfamiliar vehicles. Whatever had happened to the three women had occurred quietly enough that it didn't alert neighbors in the middle of the night. By Monday, June 8, the investigation had expanded. The FBI became involved, bringing additional resources and expertise. Search parties formed to comb nearby areas. Missing person flyers with photos of all three women were distributed throughout Springfield and surrounding communities. Local media outlets ran stories about the disappearances, asking anyone with information to come forward. But despite these early efforts, substantial leads remained elusive. The women had seemingly vanished without a trace, leaving investigators with few concrete clues to follow. As days passed without any sign of the missing women, the search expanded both geographically and in its intensity. Law enforcement agencies from multiple jurisdictions joined the effort, and hundreds of volunteers mobilized to help find Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy. Search teams combed wooded areas, fields, and waterways around Springfield. They checked abandoned buildings, construction sites, and remote locations where someone might conceal evidence. Divers explored lakes and ponds. Officers went door to door in the neighborhood around East Del Mar Street, seeking anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. The investigation also delved deeper into the women's personal lives, looking for any connections, conflicts, or issues that might explain their disappearance. Detectives interviewed ex-boyfriends, co-workers, classmates, and acquaintances. They examined phone records, bank statements, and other documentation that might provide clues. Several potential leads emerged during this period, though none would ultimately lead to a resolution of the case. One avenue of investigation involved two men who had reportedly been harassing Susie at a graduation party earlier in the evening. According to witnesses, these individuals had behaved aggressively toward her, though Susie had not seemed overly concerned by the interaction. Police identified and interviewed these men, but could not establish a connection to the disappearances. Another focus was on Susie's ex-boyfriend, who had a troubled relationship history with her. In the weeks before the disappearance, Susie had accused him of stealing items from her. However, this individual had an alibi for the night in question, and investigators could not find evidence linking him to the women's disappearance. Detectives also learned that approximately 7 weeks before the disappearances, Cheryl had mentioned to friends that she felt she was being watched. She reported hearing strange noises around the house at night. Whether these concerns were related to what eventually happened remains unknown, but they suggested the possibility that someone had been observing the house and its occupants prior to June 7. The case generated hundreds of tips from the public. People reported possible sightings of the women in locations across Missouri and neighboring states. Each tip had to be investigated, requiring significant resources and often leading investigators down paths that ultimately proved fruitless. One particularly compelling tip came from a woman who claimed to have seen 3 women matching the description of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy in the company of an unfamiliar man at a gas station in the early morning hours of June 7. While this sighting was never confirmed, it raised the possibility that the women might have left the house voluntarily with someone they knew or trusted. As the days turned into weeks, the case began to attract national attention. The story was featured on television programs like Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted, generating additional tips from across the country. A reward fund was established, eventually growing to over $40,000 for information leading to the resolution of the case. Despite these extensive efforts, the investigation reached a frustrating impasse. There were theories but little concrete evidence. There were possibilities but no certainties. The women's disappearance remained as mysterious weeks after they vanished as it had been on that Sunday morning when they were first discovered missing. The lack of physical evidence was particularly challenging for investigators. With no crime scene, no signs of violence, and no recovered belongings or remains, they had little forensic material to work with. In many ways, they were searching for shadows, trying to reconstruct events that had left almost no trace. As the investigation continued without resolution, various theories emerged about what might have happened to Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy. Each theory had its supporters and detractors, and each presented different challenges for investigators trying to determine the truth. The most prevalent theory was that the three women had been abducted from the house by someone who either knew them or who was able to gain their trust. The lack of signs of forced entry or struggle suggested that they might have opened the door willingly to their abductor, or that the person had a key to the house. This theory was supported by the fact that all their personal belongings remained behind, indicating they hadn't planned to leave. Some speculated that the broken porch light might have been a lure. Someone broke it deliberately to draw one of the women outside to investigate, then forced her back inside and compelled the others to leave with them. This would explain why someone had taken the time to clean up the broken glass despite presumably being in the midst of committing a serious crime. Another theory suggested that the women might have been targeted by someone who had been watching the house and knew that Susie and Stacy would be returning after graduation celebrations. The mention by Cheryl weeks earlier that she felt she was being watched lent some credence to this possibility. Some investigators believed that the women might have known their abductor. The neighborhood was quiet that night, with no reports of disturbances that would accompany a violent struggle against a stranger. If the women recognized or trusted the person at the door, they might have let them in without raising an alarm. Over the years, several specific suspects emerged as possibilities, though none has ever been charged in connection with the disappearances. Robert Craig Cox, a convicted kidnapper and robber with a history of violence against women, became a person of interest in the case. Cox had been living in Springfield at the time of the disappearances and reportedly told investigators that he knew the women were dead and buried, but that their bodies would never be found. However, Cox has also given conflicting statements about his alleged involvement, and some investigators believe his claims were an attempt to gain attention or leverage for his own legal situations. Another potential suspect was Gerald Carnahan, who was later convicted of an unrelated 1985 murder of a young woman in Springfield. While Carnahan was investigated in connection with the three, no evidence was found linking him directly to their disappearance. Various other individuals have been investigated over the years, including local sex offenders, people with connections to the women, and individuals who exhibited suspicious behavior around the time of the disappearance. In each case, investigators have been unable to gather sufficient evidence to make an arrest or file charges. Some theories have focused on the possibility that the women witnessed something they shouldn't have, perhaps drug activity or another crime in the neighborhood, and were abducted to prevent them from reporting what they saw. Others have suggested that one of the women was the intended target, with the other two taken because they were witnesses. A persistent rumor in Springfield involves a hospital parking garage that was under construction at the time of the disappearances. According to this theory, the women's bodies were concealed in the concrete foundation of this structure. While police did investigate this possibility and used ground-penetrating radar to examine the site, no evidence was found to support this claim. The case has also attracted numerous psychics and self-proclaimed mediums who have offered their insights about what happened to the women. While law enforcement typically does not base investigations on such information, some officers have followed up on specific locations identified by psychics, though these efforts have not led to breakthroughs. What makes the case of the Springfield Three particularly baffling is the fact that three adults disappeared simultaneously without leaving evidence behind. Most theories struggle to explain how one person could control three women without causing a disturbance, or how multiple perpetrators could enter and leave the house without being noticed by neighbors. As months turned into years and years into decades, the disappearance of the Springfield Three has had a profound and lasting impact on the community of Springfield and on the families of the missing women. For Janice and Stuart McCall, Stacy's parents, the disappearance of their daughter transformed their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Janice became a tireless advocate, not only for finding her daughter but for missing persons cases in general. She founded One Missing Link, an organization dedicated to supporting families of missing people and raising awareness about these cases. Through her advocacy, she has helped other families navigate the complex emotional and practical challenges that come with having a loved one disappear. The McCall family has maintained Stacy's room much as it was the day she disappeared, a poignant reminder of their enduring hope for answers. They have participated in countless interviews, searches, and public events over the years, keeping their daughter's case in the public eye and refusing to let the world forget about Stacy, Susie, and Cheryl. For Cheryl's and Susie's extended family, the pain has been equally profound. Cheryl's sisters and Susie's friends have continued to speak about the case, ensuring that memories of both women remain alive in the community. They describe Cheryl as a dedicated mother who worked hard to provide for her daughter, and Susie as a vibrant young woman with a bright future ahead of her. The impact on the Springfield community has also been significant. For many residents who lived through that summer of 1992, the case fundamentally changed their sense of security. Springfield was not a place where people vanished without a trace, especially not 3 people at once from a house that showed no signs of violence. The mystery created a lingering uneasiness that has never fully dissipated. The case became a defining moment in Springfield's history, a dividing line between before and after. Residents who grew up in Springfield after 1992 learned about the case as part of local lore, often hearing about it from parents who remembered the intense searches and media coverage. The house on East Delmar Street became a local landmark of sorts, with people driving by to see the place where 3 women vanished without explanation. Law enforcement agencies in Springfield and beyond were also changed by the investigation. The case revealed challenges in communication between agencies and highlighted the need for improved protocols in missing persons cases. Many officers who worked on the case have described it as the most baffling and frustrating investigation of their careers, a mystery that has haunted them professionally and personally. The media coverage of the Springfield 3 helped bring national attention to missing persons cases in general. The case was featured on numerous television programs, podcasts, and in books, keeping the story alive in the public consciousness and serving as a reminder that even in modern America, people can seemingly vanish without explanation. Perhaps most significantly, the case has left an empty space in the lives of all who knew and loved Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy, an absence of closure, an unresolved question that lingers year after year. Birthdays, holidays, graduations, and countless other milestones have come and gone without them, each one a reminder of what was lost that night in June 1992. Though the case has grown cold over the years, the investigation into the disappearance of the Springfield 3 has never officially closed. Law enforcement agencies continue to follow up on new tips, review old evidence with new technologies, and pursue any potential leads that emerge. In 2007, on the 15th anniversary of the disappearances, the Springfield Police Department announced that they would be re-examining the case with fresh eyes. They formed a task force to review all the evidence, re-interview witnesses, and apply new forensic techniques that hadn't been available in 1992. While this renewed effort didn't solve the case, it demonstrated the ongoing commitment to finding answers. Advances in DNA technology have allowed investigators to re-examine what little physical evidence exists in the case. Items from the house on East Delmar Street that might contain trace DNA have been tested and retested as forensic capabilities have improved over the decades. Unfortunately, these efforts have not yet yielded definitive results. In 2019, interest in the case was rekindled when officials considered the possibility of excavating the parking garage that had long been rumored to contain the women's remains. Ground-penetrating radar identified anomalies in the concrete that some experts believed warranted further investigation. However, after extensive review, authorities determined that excavation was not justified based on the evidence available. The Springfield Police Department maintains a dedicated tip line for the case, and they still receive calls with potential information. Each tip is evaluated and followed up on, regardless of how much time has passed. Detectives who weren't even born when the women disappeared are now working on the case, bringing fresh perspectives to the investigation. Various private investigators, true crime enthusiasts, and amateur sleuths have also continued to research the case independently. Online forums dedicated to the Springfield 3 analyze every aspect of the disappearance, from the timeline of that night to the backgrounds of potential suspects. While these unofficial investigations must be viewed with appropriate skepticism, they have occasionally generated new perspectives or identified overlooked details that merit further examination. The case has been featured on numerous podcasts and YouTube channels in recent years, introducing the story to new generations and sometimes generating new tips from listeners. These modern platforms have helped keep public interest alive in ways that weren't possible in the pre-internet era when the women first disappeared. Family members have continued their own efforts to find answers. They have consulted with private investigators, psychics, and experts in various fields. They have maintained websites and social media pages dedicated to the case. They have remained accessible to media and willing to share their stories, understanding that each new article or program might reach someone with information about what happened. As with many long unsolved cases, there is a persistent hope that someone who has remained silent for years might finally come forward. Perhaps someone with knowledge of the crime has carried the burden of that secret for decades and will choose to speak. Perhaps relationships between people with information have changed over time, removing the barriers that once prevented them from talking to authorities. There is also the possibility that the answer might come from an unexpected direction. Perhaps an unrelated criminal case will yield information about the Springfield 3, or advances in forensic technology will allow for new analysis of existing evidence. Many cold cases have been solved decades after the fact through such unanticipated developments. For now, the fate of Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall remains one of America's most enduring mysteries. 3 women who went to sleep in a house in Springfield and were never seen again. Their story continues to evoke curiosity, compassion, and an enduring hope that someday, somehow, the truth will be known. As this story draws to a close, the mystery of the Springfield 3 remains unsolved. Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall vanished from a small house in Springfield, Missouri in June 1992, leaving behind their personal belongings and countless unanswered questions. Their story reminds us of the fragility of our daily lives, how ordinary moments can transform into extraordinary mysteries in the space of a single night. It speaks to our fundamental need for closure and answers, and the painful void that exists when those answers remain elusive. For the families of these 3 women, the search continues. Their dedication to finding the truth has never wavered across 3 decades of uncertainty. They have faced their unimaginable loss with courage and determination, refusing to let the world forget about Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy. If you're still awake as our story concludes, perhaps take a moment to appreciate the certainties in your own life, the knowledge of where your loved ones are tonight, the simple comfort of routine and predictability that most of us take for granted. And perhaps consider the families who have lived for decades without these comforts, who still wait for answers that may someday come. If you've already drifted into sleep, may your dreams be peaceful, carried along by the gentle rhythm of the rain. Thank you for joining me tonight for this exploration of one of America's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. If you found this story engaging or if it helped you find sleep, please consider subscribing to Whispered Mysteries and turning on notifications for future episodes. Next week, we'll explore another true crime case, the mysterious circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Maura Murray from a rural New Hampshire road in 2004. Until then, sleep well, and remember that even in our most puzzling mysteries, there remains the possibility that tomorrow may bring answers that today has withheld. Story 5. This is one of the most puzzling disappearances in recent American history, the case of Maura Murray. On a cold February evening in 2004, this 21-year-old nursing student vanished from a rural road in New Hampshire after a minor car accident. What makes this case so compelling is not just the mysterious circumstances of her disappearance, but the many unanswered questions that continue to surround it nearly 2 decades later. To understand Maura Murray's story, we must first immerse ourselves in the setting where she disappeared, the winter landscape of northern New Hampshire. Unlike the bustling urban centers of Boston or New York, this region is characterized by vast stretches of wilderness, small scattered communities, and winding roads that cut through dense forests and rolling mountains. The White Mountains region of New Hampshire possesses a quiet beauty that draws tourists in summer and fall, but in February, it transforms into a more isolated, challenging environment. The forests stand stark against the snow, branches bare and reaching toward gray skies. The hiking trails that welcome thousands in warmer months lie silent under blankets of snow, and the mountain passes become treacherous with ice and winter storms. Haverhill, New Hampshire, the town near where Maura's car was found, embodies this rural New England character. With a population of fewer than 5,000 people spread across several small villages and hamlets, it's a place where neighbors know each other, where out-of-state license plates are noticed, and where the harsh winter conditions shape daily life from November through March. Route 112, where Maura's car was discovered, is a 2-lane highway that winds through this sparsely populated area. In some stretches, houses may be separated by miles rather than blocks, and cell phone reception, even in 2004, was unreliable at best, non-existent at worst. Driving these roads at night, one might pass through long stretches of darkness broken only by occasional porch lights in the distance or the glow of small village centers. On February 9, 2004, the weather in this region added another layer of challenge. The temperature hovered in the low 20s Fahrenheit, and light snow had fallen earlier in the day, making the roads slick in spots. As evening approached, the temperature dropped further, turning wet patches to ice and reducing visibility. By nightfall, the cold had intensified, with temperatures falling into the single digits. Anyone exposed to these elements for an extended period would face serious risk of hypothermia. This was before our constantly connected modern era. In 2004, GPS navigation was not yet common in everyday vehicles. Smartphones didn't exist, the first iPhone was still 3 years away. Social media platforms like Facebook were just emerging, and were nothing like the pervasive networks they would become. If you needed directions, you likely used a paper map. If your car broke down on a rural road, you couldn't simply call an Uber or quickly search for the nearest tow service. In this environment, people still relied heavily on landline phones, face-to-face interactions, and community assistance. A stranded motorist might need to walk to the nearest house to ask for help, and news traveled through personal connections rather than instant digital updates. This context is crucial for understanding the events that unfolded that February evening and the challenges faced by both Maura and those who would later search for her. What makes Maura Murray's disappearance particularly intriguing are the actions she took in the days and hours before she vanished. Like pieces of an incomplete puzzle, these moments offer glimpses into her state of mind, yet still leave us wondering about her intentions. On Thursday, February 5, 2004, just 4 days before her disappearance, Maura was working her night shift at the security desk in her UMass Amherst dormitory. Around 10:30 p.m., she received a phone call that visibly upset her. According to her supervisor, Maura broke down in tears and became so distraught that she had to be escorted back to her room. The contents of this call have never been conclusively determined, creating the first of many questions surrounding her disappearance. The following day, Maura's father, Fred Murray, arrived at UMass to help her purchase a new car. They spent Saturday looking at vehicles, and then Fred returned to his motel. That evening, Maura borrowed her father's Toyota Corolla to attend a campus party. Sometime after midnight, while driving back to her father's motel, Maura struck a guardrail, causing approximately $10,000 in damage to her father's car. The police arrived at the scene, but no field sobriety test was administered, and no citations were issued. Fred learned of the accident the next morning and arranged for a tow truck. On Sunday, February 8, Fred and Maura had lunch together, where Fred gave her $4,000 in cash to help with car repairs. They parted ways with Fred believing Maura would contact insurance companies the next day about the accident. This would be the last time he saw his daughter. Monday, February 9, the day Maura disappeared, began with a series of unusual actions that suggest some form of planning. At 10:20 a.m., Maura emailed one of her professors, writing, "I'm sorry but my sister had an emergency with her babies and I need to go home to help. I'll be back by the end of the week. I'll email you with makeup work soon." She sent a similar email to her campus job supervisor. There was just one problem: there was no family emergency. Maura's sister had not experienced any crisis with her children. This fabricated excuse marked the beginning of a chain of decisions that have confounded investigators and family members alike. After sending these emails, Maura began methodically preparing for what appeared to be a trip. She called her boyfriend, Bill Roche, an Army lieutenant stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and left a voicemail promising to call him later. She then packed her car with clothing, textbooks, toiletries, and printed directions to Burlington, Vermont. Around 2:30 p.m., she visited an ATM and withdrew $280, nearly emptying her bank account. The security camera captured her image, the last confirmed photograph of Maura Murray. She appeared calm and collected, giving no indication of the mystery that would soon surround her name. Following the ATM withdrawal, Maura stopped at a local liquor store and purchased approximately $40 worth of alcohol, including Bailey's Irish Cream, Kahlua, vodka, and a box of Franzia wine. The cashier later remembered her because she appeared to be of legal drinking age and didn't require identification. At some point that afternoon, Maura had searched for directions and accommodations in the Bartlett and Burlington areas, both in northern New England, with Bartlett in New Hampshire and Burlington in Vermont. She had called several lodging facilities, including a condominium in Bartlett that her family had stayed at previously. These searches suggest she was planning to travel north, though her exact destination remains unknown. Notably, Maura told no one about these plans. Not her friends at UMass, not her siblings, not her father, and not her boyfriend. Whether this secrecy was intentional or simply a matter of personal privacy has been endlessly debated by those who have studied her case. Around 4:30 p.m., Maura placed another call to her boyfriend, leaving a second voicemail with the same message: she would call him later. She also checked her voicemail for the last time at 4:37 p.m. What messages she received, if any, remain unknown. As the afternoon transitioned to evening, Maura Murray, driving her black 1996 Saturn sedan, left the UMass Amherst campus and began heading north. The rain that had been falling intermittently throughout the day in Massachusetts would give way to snow flurries and freezing temperatures as she drove into New Hampshire. Her preparations, the false email about a family emergency, the withdrawal of cash, the purchase of alcohol, the research of accommodations, suggest a plan of some kind. But whether that plan involved a simple getaway to clear her head, an attempt to start anew somewhere else, or something entirely different, we still don't know. These final known actions before her disappearance have become the foundation for countless theories and speculations that continue to this day. As we listen to the rain, consider how ordinary these activities might seem in isolation: checking email, withdrawing money, buying beverages, researching places to stay, yet when pieced together on the day of a disappearance, they take on new significance, becoming clues in a mystery that has remained unsolved for nearly 2 decades. As dusk settled over New England on February 9, 2004, Maura Murray was somewhere on the roads of northern New Hampshire. We know she left Amherst, Massachusetts, driving her Saturn sedan northward, but the exact route she took and any stops she might have made along the way remain speculative. What we do know with certainty is where her journey visibly ended, a sharp bend on Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, approximately 140 miles from her starting point. This particular stretch of Route 112, also known locally as Wild Ammonoosuc Road, winds through sparsely populated woodland. The road curves frequently as it follows the natural contours of the land, requiring drivers' full attention, especially in winter conditions. On that February evening, with temperatures dropping and daylight fading, the driving conditions were becoming increasingly challenging. At approximately 7:27 p.m., a local resident named Faith Westman heard what she described as a thud outside her home. Looking through her window, she observed a car off the road at a sharp bend, its headlights still illuminating the snowy landscape. Concerned, she called the local police department to report what appeared to be a minor accident. At almost the same time, another neighbor, Butch Atwood, a school bus driver who had just returned home from his route, spotted the disabled vehicle as he was driving his personal bus. Atwood pulled alongside the Saturn and saw a young woman, Maura Murray, still in the driver's seat. The car had gone off the road and was now facing the wrong direction, its front end pressed against a snowbank, the rear end extending slightly into the roadway. Atwood, a large man in his 60s, stopped his bus and approached Maura's car to offer assistance. He later recalled that Maura appeared shaken but not seriously injured. She had a small cut on her face, possibly from impact with the steering wheel or deployed airbag, and strands of her hair were draped over her face. The red light from her car's taillights cast an unusual glow in the winter darkness. "I'm fine," she reportedly told Atwood when he asked if she needed help. "I've already called AAA." She declined his offer to call for assistance and said she didn't need him to call the police. This claim about contacting AAA would later stand out as particularly strange. There was no cell phone service in that area, making it impossible for her to have called anyone from that location. Atwood, perhaps sensing something wasn't quite right but respecting her wishes, returned to his home about 100 yards up the road. Once inside, he mentioned the accident to his wife and, despite Maura's assurances, called the police to report the incident. This call was placed at approximately 7:42 p.m. He then changed out of his uniform and continued to watch out his window, keeping an eye on the accident scene. Meanwhile, the local police were already responding based on Faith Westman's earlier call. Officer Cecil Smith was dispatched from the Haverhill Police Department at 7:29 p.m., but was about 17 miles away handling another call. He arrived at the scene at 7:46 p.m., roughly 10 to 17 minutes after Atwood had spoken with Maura. What Officer Smith found was perplexing. Maura's Saturn was still there, but Maura herself was nowhere to be seen. In just those few minutes between Atwood leaving and Officer Smith arriving, Maura Murray had vanished. The car was locked, with some of her belongings still inside, including the alcohol she had purchased earlier that day. A box of Franzia wine had apparently broken in the crash, spilling red liquid on the driver's seat and car ceiling. Initially mistaken for blood, this spilled wine created momentary alarm until its true nature was identified. Officer Smith immediately began searching the immediate area, walking around the car and looking for any signs of the driver. He noted several unusual details about the scene. Despite the collision appearing relatively minor, the airbags had not deployed, and damage to the car was minimal. A rag had been stuffed into the tailpipe. This detail has generated significant speculation, with some suggesting it might indicate an attempt to cause carbon monoxide poisoning, while others contend it might have been an old mechanic's trick to reduce smoke from a failing engine. Another puzzling element was the state of Maura's personal items in the car. Her cell phone was missing, yet she had left behind her credit cards, packed clothing, and college textbooks. A AAA card was found, but as mentioned earlier, there was no record of her contacting their service. A MapQuest printout with directions to Burlington, Vermont was discovered among her belongings, suggesting that might have been her intended destination. Outside the vehicle, Officer Smith noticed something else unusual. There were no footprints leading away from the car into the surrounding woods. The only visible footprints were on the roadside itself, heading east along Route 112, suggesting Maura had walked away on the road rather than venturing into the forest. However, these footprints disappeared after a short distance. By 8 p.m., a local fire truck and ambulance had arrived to assist, and several volunteers helped search the immediate area. The darkness, combined with the freezing temperatures, made the search challenging. No one reported seeing a young woman walking along the road, despite the accident occurring during what would normally be a time when local residents might be returning from work. Meanwhile, Butch Atwood, who had been watching from his window, stated that he never saw Maura leave the scene. Given the position of his house, it seems likely that had she walked past his home on Route 112, he would have noticed her. This suggests that either she headed in the opposite direction or was picked up by a passing motorist before Smith arrived. At 9:30 p.m., approximately 2 hours after the accident, Maura's vehicle was towed from the scene to a local garage. The police had run her license plate and discovered the car was registered to her. At this point, the situation was still being treated as an abandoned vehicle following a minor accident, not as a missing person case. As the hours passed into the late night of February 9, no one had reported any sightings of a young woman walking along Route 112 or in the nearby town centers. The temperature had dropped into the single digits, creating potentially life-threatening conditions for anyone outside without proper winter gear. And yet, Maura Murray had seemingly vanished without a trace, leaving behind her car and most of her possessions, a curious tableau of clues that offered more questions than answers. The timeline of that evening presents a particular challenge. In just those 10 to 17 minutes between Atwood's conversation with Maura and Officer Smith's arrival, she had disappeared completely. This narrow window of time has become the focus of intense scrutiny and speculation, representing the last known moments before Maura Murray entered the realm of the missing. The morning after Maura's accident, on February 10, what had begun as a simple case of an abandoned vehicle following a minor accident began to evolve into something far more concerning. The transformation from stranded motorist to missing person occurred gradually, as the pieces of information accumulated and painted an increasingly worrying picture. By the morning light, local police returned to the scene of the accident to conduct a more thorough examination of the area. The daylight revealed what the darkness had concealed. The surrounding wilderness was vast and unforgiving. Dense wood stretched in all directions from the crash site, with steep terrain and February snow creating a challenging landscape to search. Small streams and ravines cut through the forest, creating natural hazards that would be dangerous to navigate, especially in winter conditions. That morning, Officer Cecil Smith, who had been the first responder the previous night, began the process of contacting Maura's family. Using information from the vehicle registration, he was able to reach Maura's father, Fred Murray. The news came as a complete shock to Fred. He had no idea Maura had left campus, let alone traveled to New Hampshire. When informed about the accident and Maura's absence from the scene, Fred immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't like his daughter. She wouldn't simply walk away from her car in freezing temperatures in an unfamiliar area. Fred Murray immediately contacted Maura's siblings and boyfriend, Bill Roche, to inform them of the situation. Bill, still stationed at Fort Sill in Oklahoma, was granted emergency leave to help with the search. Maura's older sister, Kathleen, and her brothers, Fred Jr. and Kurt, all prepared to travel to New Hampshire. The family's concern was amplified by the fact that none of them had received any communication from Maura since before her disappearance. Meanwhile, the Haverhill Police Department officially classified Maura as a missing person and initiated standard protocols for such cases. By midday on February 10, officers had returned to the crash site and surrounding area with a more organized approach. They began by expanding the search radius around the accident scene, checking nearby properties, outbuildings, and forested areas for any sign of the missing woman. One of the most puzzling aspects that became apparent in the daylight search was the complete lack of footprints leading from the road into the surrounding snow-covered woods. The only footprints visible were those on the roadside itself, and these extended only a short distance before disappearing. This suggested that Maura had either stayed on the plowed road surface or had been picked up by someone in a vehicle shortly after the accident. As the search expanded, officers conducted a more thorough inventory of Maura's abandoned Saturn. Inside, they found an assortment of items that only deepened the mystery. Her UMass textbooks were neatly packed, suggesting she had planned to continue her studies wherever she was heading. Several changes of clothing were found, packed as if for a short trip. The alcohol purchased earlier that day was mostly still there, though the box of Franzia wine had broken in the impact, spilling its contents inside the vehicle. Perhaps most tellingly, officers discovered blank accident report forms in the car, the same type of forms that would be filled out following a traffic incident. These forms were from her previous accident in Hadley, Massachusetts just days earlier, when she had damaged her father's car. Their presence suggested Maura might have been prepared for the possibility of another accident during her journey. What was notably absent from the vehicle was equally significant. Maura's cell phone was nowhere to be found, suggesting she had it with her when she left the scene. Her purse was missing as well, likely containing her driver's license and other personal identification. A few items of clothing appeared to be missing when compared to what family members later said she would typically pack for even a short trip. By the evening of February 10, as the various members of Maura's family began arriving in Haverhill, police had checked her financial records and phone activity. What they discovered only added to the growing concern. There had been absolutely no activity on her credit card since the purchase at the liquor store the day before. Her cell phone showed no calls made or received after she checked her voicemail at 4:37 p.m. on February 9. Her bank account remained untouched after the ATM withdrawal prior to her departure. This complete cessation of all traceable activity created a stark technological silence that was deeply troubling. In an age where most people leave digital footprints everywhere they go, Maura had seemingly vanished not just physically, but digitally as well. As her family gathered in the small town of Haverhill, they were confronted with a baffling situation. Fred Murray, who had just seen his daughter 2 days earlier, found himself standing near the spot where her car had been found, trying to understand what could have possibly happened in those crucial minutes after the accident. The area felt alien and remote to the family, far from Maura's familiar surroundings of UMass Amherst or her hometown of Hanson, Massachusetts. Local residents, while helpful and concerned, could offer little additional information. A few mentioned seeing the Saturn on the roadside that evening, but no one reported seeing Maura herself walking along Route 112 or in nearby villages. The small communities of Swiftwater and Bath, located a few miles in either direction from the crash site, had no reports of a young woman seeking assistance that night. The Murray family, working alongside local law enforcement, began distributing flyers with Maura's photograph throughout the region. They visited local businesses, spoke with residents, and searched roadside areas where she might have walked. The community response was supportive, with many local volunteers joining the effort despite having no connection to Maura or her family. As the second day of Maura's disappearance came to a close, the realization began to settle in: this was not a simple case of a young woman walking away from a minor accident. Something unusual had occurred in those minutes between Butch Atwood's offer of help and Officer Smith's arrival. And with each passing hour in the freezing February temperatures, the concern for Maura's well-being grew more acute. The absence of answers weighed heavily on those involved in the search. For the Murray family, the night of February 10th was filled with unanswerable questions and growing fear. For law enforcement, the case presented a perplexing set of circumstances that defied easy explanation. And somewhere, though no one knew where, Maura Murray remained missing, her whereabouts unknown as the search entered its second night. By February 11th, 2 days after Maura's disappearance, the case had escalated significantly. What had begun as a local police matter in Haverhill had grown to involve the New Hampshire State Police. The expanded resources brought additional investigators, technology, and search capabilities to the effort. One of the first major developments came with the deployment of search dogs. K-9 units were brought to the crash site with the hope that they could track Maura's scent and determine which direction she had traveled after leaving her car. The dogs were given items of Maura's clothing from the vehicle to establish her scent. What happened next has become another piece of the puzzling narrative of this case. According to reports, the dogs picked up Maura's scent at the car and followed it approximately 100 yards east along Route 112 in the direction of Bath, New Hampshire. Then, abruptly, the scent trail ended. This sudden disappearance of her scent suggested to handlers and investigators that Maura might have entered a vehicle at that point. Had she accepted a ride from a passing motorist? Had someone she knew met her by arrangement? Or had something more concerning occurred? The dog's inability to track her beyond this point created yet another layer of mystery. The investigation broadened to include more detailed interviews with local residents. Butch Atwood, the bus driver who had spoken with Maura at the accident scene, was questioned multiple times. He maintained that after returning to his home, he had watched the road and never saw Maura walk past his house, which was located roughly 100 yards from the crash site. Given the positioning of his home and the fact that he was specifically watching for any activity around the disabled Saturn, investigators found this testimony significant. If Maura had walked west on Route 112, away from Atwood's house, she would have been headed into a more remote area with fewer residences, an unusual choice for someone seeking help. Faith Westman, who had called police after hearing the thud of the accident, was also interviewed in detail. She reported seeing what appeared to be a single person moving around the car with a cigarette lighter or similar small light source before police arrived. Maura was not known to be a smoker, raising questions about whether this was indeed Maura or possibly someone else at the scene. Another neighbor, who lived across from the accident site, reported seeing the Saturn's headlights, and what appeared to be activity around the vehicle, then the headlights going off shortly before police arrived. These accounts created a timeline that seemed to confirm the narrow window during which Maura had vanished from the scene. As investigators continued gathering information, they gained access to Maura's computer records from UMass. Her internet search history revealed queries about the White Mountains region and accommodations in both New Hampshire and Vermont. She had researched directions to Burlington, Vermont, consistent with the MapQuest printout found in her car. She had also looked up information on Bartlett, New Hampshire, where her family had vacationed previously. These searches indicated that her journey north was not a spontaneous decision but something she had been planning, at least briefly. However, they offered no clear indication of her final destination or purpose. Was she planning a solo getaway to clear her head after recent stresses? Was she meeting someone? Or was she genuinely considering a more permanent departure from her current life? The searches themselves provided facts but no definitive answers about her intentions. Investigators also delved into the email Maura had sent to her professors about a death in the family. Upon contacting her family members, it became clear that this was a fabrication. There had been no death or emergency involving any of her relatives. This deception raised significant questions about Maura's state of mind and intentions. Why create such a story? Was it simply to justify a few days' absence from classes, Or was it part of a larger plan to disappear? While the investigation progressed in New Hampshire, detectives also examined Maura's life at UMass Amherst. They interviewed her friends, dorm mates, and co-workers, trying to build a picture of her mental state and activities in the days before her disappearance. Most reported that Maura had seemed normal in her interactions, though some noted she had been quieter than usual following the incident with her father's car. No one reported any statements from Maura about plans to leave campus or travel to New Hampshire or Vermont. Her relationship with her boyfriend, Bill Roche, was also examined. By all accounts, including Bill's own statements and phone records, their relationship appeared to be on solid ground. They had spoken regularly, with no evidence of a significant dispute or breakup that might have triggered her departure. Bill had been hundreds of miles away in Oklahoma when Maura disappeared, giving him a clear alibi for the time of her disappearance. As the days of searching stretched into a week, investigators began receiving reports of possible sightings. One of the most intriguing came from a contractor who reported seeing a young woman matching Maura's description jogging along Route 112, approximately 4 to 5 miles east of the accident scene, around 8:30 p.m. on the night of February 9. This would have been approximately 1 hour after her disappearance from the crash site. Another potential sighting came from a convenience store clerk in Woodsville, New Hampshire, who believed Maura might have come into the store earlier on the day of her disappearance. However, without security camera footage to confirm these accounts, they remained unverified possibilities rather than confirmed facts. The investigation also explored the possibility that Maura's disappearance might be connected to other missing persons cases in the region. Some attention focused on the disappearance of a woman named Brianna Maitland, who vanished from Montgomery, Vermont, about a month after Maura, in March 2004. Brianna's case also involved an abandoned car and mysterious circumstances. However, despite the superficial similarities, investigators found no concrete evidence linking the two cases. By mid-February, the search had expanded to include helicopters with thermal imaging technology, additional K-9 units, and teams of volunteers combing the woods near the accident site. Despite these extensive efforts, no physical evidence of Maura's presence in the surrounding wilderness was discovered, no clothing, no personal items, no indications of travel through the dense forest. This lack of physical evidence in the surrounding area strengthened the theory that Maura had left the scene in a vehicle rather than on foot. But whether this departure was voluntary or involuntary remained the central, unanswered question of the investigation. Had she flagged down a passing car for help? Had she met someone by prior arrangement? Or had something more concerning occurred in those crucial minutes after Butch Atwood left and before Officer Smith arrived? As February turned to March, with still no sign of Maura Murray, the case became increasingly frustrating for investigators and agonizing for her family. The initial urgency of a missing person case began to transform into the methodical pace of a long-term investigation. The questions that had emerged in the first hours and days remained largely unanswered, but they had been refined and focused through the accumulation of evidence and testimony. The rain continues to fall as we contemplate this point in the investigation, a moment when the immediate search was giving way to a longer, more complex process of gathering and analyzing information. For Maura's family, this transition marked the beginning of what would become years of searching, advocating, and waiting for answers. For investigators, it represented a case that refused to yield its secrets despite their best efforts. And for Maura herself, it marked the continuation of an absence that has now stretched across many years, an unresolved chapter in the lives of all who knew her. In the absence of definitive answers, the case of Maura Murray has generated numerous theories about what might have happened after she vanished from Route 112. These theories range from the hopeful to the tragic, from the plausible to the unlikely. Each attempts to make sense of the limited facts available, and each has its proponents and detractors among those who have studied this perplexing case. Perhaps the most optimistic theory is that Maura deliberately walked away from her life and started anew somewhere else. Proponents of this voluntary disappearance theory point to several elements that suggest premeditation: the fabricated email about a family emergency, the withdrawal of nearly all her money, the research into accommodations in unfamiliar areas, and the alcohol purchases that might suggest a celebration of some kind. Those who believe Maura may have engineered her own disappearance suggest she might have had a second vehicle waiting nearby, or an accomplice who picked her up after the accident. They theorize that she may have seen the accident as a complication in her plan but continued with it nonetheless, abandoning her damaged Saturn and continuing to an unknown destination where she established a new identity. Supporting this theory is the fact that Maura was an intelligent young woman with the capability to plan such a departure. She had experience with wilderness survival through her time at West Point, and her nursing studies would have given her skills that would be valuable anywhere. If she truly wanted to start over somewhere new, she would have had the intelligence and resourcefulness to do so. However, this theory faces significant challenges. In the digital age, maintaining a completely new identity without leaving traces is extraordinarily difficult. No credible sightings of Maura have ever been confirmed in the years since her disappearance. Additionally, those who knew her well have consistently stated that while she might have wanted a few days away to clear her head, permanently abandoning her family, her education, and her future plans would have been out of character. Her father, Fred Murray, has been particularly adamant that Maura would not have chosen to cut off all contact with her family. Their relationship had been close, and despite any recent stresses in her life, there were no signs of the kind of severe distress or disillusionment that might drive someone to such an extreme action. A second, more concerning theory is that Maura accepted a ride from a passing motorist who had ill intentions. The rural nature of Route 112, the freezing temperatures, and Maura's potential disorientation after the accident might have made accepting a ride from a stranger seem like a reasonable option. The abrupt end to the scent trail picked up by search dogs approximately 100 yards from the crash site lends some credence to this possibility. This theory suggests that Maura, stranded in the cold with a disabled vehicle and possibly wanting to avoid police due to the alcohol in her car, made the fateful decision to accept a ride from someone who happened to be passing through this remote area. In this scenario, what began as a simple act of roadside assistance turned into something much darker, resulting in harm coming to Maura at the hands of this unknown person. The statistical reality that many missing young women do fall victim to opportunistic violence gives this theory weight in the minds of some investigators. The fact that no trace of Maura has been found despite extensive searches might be explained by a perpetrator familiar with the region who knew where to conceal evidence. However, critics of this theory note the relatively low probability of a predator happening to pass by in the short window of time between Butch Atwood leaving and police arriving. Route 112 was not heavily traveled, especially on a cold winter night. The timing would have required an extraordinary and tragic coincidence. A third theory proposes that Maura, possibly disoriented, suffering from a mild concussion from the accident, or impaired by alcohol, wandered away from the crash site and into the surrounding wilderness. In this scenario, she may have been attempting to avoid a DUI charge due to the alcohol in her vehicle, and in her confusion, made the fatal error of leaving the road for the woods. The February temperatures in New Hampshire, which dropped into the single digits that night, would have presented a serious threat of hypothermia to anyone unprepared for extended exposure. If Maura entered the dense forest surrounding the accident site, she might have quickly become disoriented in the darkness, unable to find her way back to the road, ultimately succumbing to the elements. However, this theory also faces significant challenges. The extensive searches conducted in the days and weeks following her disappearance covered the surrounding wilderness thoroughly. No physical evidence, clothing, personal items, or remains, has ever been discovered despite multiple searches with trained teams and dogs. Additionally, the absence of footprints leading from the roadway into the snow-covered woods seems to contradict this possibility. A fourth theory, often referred to as the tandem driver theory, suggests that Maura's disappearance was not a spontaneous event but the result of a coordinated plan. According to this theory, Maura was traveling in tandem with another vehicle driven by someone she knew. After the accident, this person picked her up and they continued their journey together, leaving the damaged Saturn behind. This would explain the lack of footprints in the woods, the abrupt end to the scent trail, and Maura's apparent willingness to leave the crash site without seeking help from nearby residents. It would also align with her internet searches and preparations, which suggested she was planning a trip rather than a permanent departure. Proponents of this theory have suggested various candidates who might have been the tandem driver, a friend from UMass, an unknown romantic interest, or even a family member. However, no concrete evidence has emerged to identify this person, and most of those close to Maura have been cleared of involvement through alibis and other investigative means. The challenge with the tandem driver theory lies in the complete silence that has followed. If Maura left with someone she knew as part of a planned trip, why has neither she nor this person ever come forward, especially after seeing the pain and concern their absence has caused? This enduring silence suggests either an extraordinarily committed determination to remain hidden or, more concerningly, that something prevented both parties from ever revealing what happened. A fifth category of theories involves local residents of the Haverhill area. Some have suggested that after leaving the crash site, Maura encountered someone who lived nearby, not a passing motorist but someone whose home she approached seeking help. In this scenario, this encounter somehow led to her disappearance, either through foul play or through a series of events that resulted in her remaining hidden. These theories have been particularly controversial as they necessarily cast suspicion on the local community. Various residents have faced public speculation over the years, despite no formal charges or official identification of suspects by law enforcement. The close-knit nature of the small towns in the region has made these suspicions particularly difficult for the community. Law enforcement has investigated numerous tips related to local residents over the years, including searching specific properties. None of these investigations has yielded definitive evidence connecting any individual to Maura's disappearance. As the gentle rain continues to carry us through this story, consider how each of these theories attempts to make sense of the same limited set of facts. They represent different ways of interpreting the evidence, different assumptions about Maura's intentions and state of mind, and different assessments of probabilities. In the absence of new evidence, they remain speculative, possibilities rather than certainties. What makes Maura Murray's case so compelling and enduring is precisely this quality of uncertainty. The known facts support multiple interpretations, and the passage of time has not brought the clarity that her family, investigators, and those following the case have hoped for. Each theory contains elements of plausibility and each faces significant challenges, leaving us in a state of wondering rather than knowing. Despite the passage of years, the search for answers in Maura Murray's disappearance has never truly ceased. Leading this enduring quest has been her father, Fred Murray, whose determination to discover what happened to his daughter has become one of the most poignant aspects of this case. Fred Murray's advocacy has taken many forms over the years. In the immediate aftermath of Maura's disappearance, he was a constant presence in the Haverhill area, conducting his own searches, posting flyers, and speaking with local residents. As days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, he continued returning to the area regularly, walking the roads and woods where his daughter was last known to be. His efforts extended beyond physical searches. Fred has consistently engaged with media to keep Maura's case in the public eye, giving countless interviews to newspapers, television programs, and later, podcasts and online forums. He has maintained a website dedicated to finding Maura and has offered rewards for information leading to resolution of the case. Perhaps most significantly, Fred Murray engaged in a lengthy legal battle with New Hampshire authorities, seeking the release of all investigative records related to his daughter's case. He argued that as a cold case, these records should be available under public information laws. This legal challenge went all the way to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, which ultimately ruled against full disclosure, determining that the case remained an active investigation and therefore exempt from full public records requests. This ruling highlighted an important aspect of Maura's case. Despite the years that have passed, law enforcement continues to classify her disappearance as an open investigation rather than a cold case. The New Hampshire State Police and the FBI, which eventually became involved in aspects of the investigation, maintain that new leads continue to be followed, though specific details of ongoing investigative efforts are rarely made public. Periodically over the years, renewed search efforts have been conducted in the area around the accident site. These have included ground searches with cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar in specific locations, and dives into nearby water bodies. In 2019, one such search focused on a residence close to where Maura's car was found, utilizing ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. While items of interest were reportedly discovered and sent for testing, no conclusive evidence regarding Maura's fate was publicly identified. Beyond the official investigation, Maura's case has generated one of the most active communities of civilian investigators in recent memory. Online forums dedicated to discussing theories, analyzing evidence, and identifying new avenues of investigation have attracted thousands of participants. Some of these civilian investigators have conducted their own searches, interviews, and research, occasionally generating tips that have been passed along to official channels. This civilian interest has helped keep pressure on officials to continue investigating and has occasionally uncovered information that may not have otherwise come to light. However, it has also sometimes led to problematic speculation about individuals not formally identified as suspects by law enforcement, creating tensions in the communities near where Maura disappeared. The media attention surrounding Maura's case has evolved significantly over the years. What began with local newspaper articles and regional television coverage eventually expanded to include national news programs, documentaries, books, and in recent years, a proliferation of podcasts dedicated wholly or partially to examining her disappearance. In 2017, Oxygen Network aired a 6-part documentary series titled The Disappearance of Maura Murray, which brought renewed national attention to the case. The series featured journalists and filmmakers working alongside Maura's family members to explore various theories and conduct new interviews with witnesses and persons of interest. Similarly, podcasts such as Missing Maura Murray and segments on popular true crime shows have introduced her story to new audiences, many of whom have subsequently joined the community of those seeking answers. These media projects have helped maintain public awareness and have occasionally generated new tips for investigators. Maura's case has also had a broader impact on missing persons awareness and procedures. The challenges faced in the early investigation have been studied as examples of how critical the first hours and days are in such cases. The questions about jurisdiction, whether local or state authorities should lead in rural missing persons cases, have influenced protocols in some regions. For many who follow the case, Maura Murray has become more than just a name or a mystery to be solved. The photos of her that accompany articles and documentaries, showing a young woman with a bright smile and obvious intelligence in her eyes, serve as a reminder that behind every missing person statistic is a human being with hopes, dreams, relationships, and a future that was unexpectedly interrupted. As we near the conclusion of our exploration of this case, it's worth noting that Maura's story continues to evolve. Even as this narrative is being shared, investigators may be following new leads, analyzing evidence with technologies that weren't available in 2004, or interviewing individuals who have finally decided to share what they know. The persistence of effort in this case, by family members, law enforcement, journalists, and concerned citizens, speaks to a collective unwillingness to allow Maura Murray to be forgotten. It reflects a shared human desire for resolution and answers, particularly in cases where a young life has been interrupted in such puzzling circumstances. After all these years, the question remains the same as it was on that February night in 2004, what happened to Maura Murray? The answer still eludes us, but the question continues to be asked, investigated, and contemplated by all those who have been touched by her story. As our time together comes to a close, the soft rainfall continues its soothing rhythm. We've journeyed through the known facts, the unanswered questions, and the enduring mystery of Maura Murray's disappearance, a case that continues to resonate with so many people years after that February evening in New Hampshire. What makes certain missing persons cases capture our collective attention while others fade from public awareness? Perhaps it's the combination of ordinary circumstances and extraordinary mystery, a young woman with a promising future, a minor car accident on a rural road, and then, absence. Perhaps it's the way this case reminds us how quickly the familiar patterns of daily life can be interrupted, how thin the line can be between presence and absence. Maura Murray's story remains unfinished, an open narrative with multiple possible endings but no confirmed conclusion. For her family, especially her father Fred, the search for answers continues, a testament to the enduring bonds between parent and child, and the natural human resistance to accepting uncertainty where loved ones are concerned. For investigators, her case represents both a professional challenge and a human mission, to provide answers not just because it's their job, but because they understand the importance of resolution for those left behind. For the many civilians who have become invested in solving this mystery, it represents a collective effort to ensure that no missing person is forgotten. Wherever Maura Murray is now, her story has touched countless lives, from those who knew her personally to those who have come to know her only through the circumstances of her disappearance. Her case has influenced how missing persons investigations are conducted, how media covers such cases, and how communities respond when someone vanishes without explanation. As you drift toward sleep, allow the gentle rain to wash away the details and theories, leaving only a quiet acknowledgement of the mystery that surrounds us all, the fundamental uncertainty of life itself, and our shared human desire to find meaning and answers even when they seem beyond our reach. Perhaps someday the full story of what happened to Maura Murray will be known. Until then, her case remains a reminder of how precious and sometimes precarious our connections to each other can be, and how important it is to cherish those connections while they exist. Our background sounds will carry you into tranquility as you drift toward sleep. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully, knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.